Greetings viewers, my name is Ghernie, a student from Singapore Polytechnic. I am creating this video as part of my Securing Microsoft Windows Journal 1 assignment. The scope of this video will cover 3 labs. I will begin each lab by summarizing its key points before demonstrating their operational features. I will be demonstrating the operational features without doing any configuration. I selected these key elements because I feel that they are repeated and applied across all lectures and labs, and they are significant in administrative and security operations. The key elements that I selected for Lab 1 is firstly, promoting Windows Server to Domain Controller, secondly, Server Manager, and thirdly, joining a client to a domain. The prerequisites to promote a Windows Server to become an Active Directory domain controller is by first installing the Active Directory Domain Services role, which I have over here. Another requirement will be installing the DNS server. Furthermore, the network settings that the Windows Server should have is a static IP address as seen over here, and the DNS settings refer to its own IP address. As such, the ADDS role will be available in the Server Manager, as well as the DNS. Additionally, the DHCP role will also be installed. And if we go to the local server, we will be able to see the domain name right here. Speaking of the Server Manager is the second key element that I will be demonstrating. The Server Manager provides us with easy accessibility to certain configuration elements, such as the firewall. This dashboard allows us to easily navigate and configure our server. Once we have configured our server, we would want a client to be able to join the domain. There are certain prerequisites for a client to join the domain. The DNS server that the client should be using is the domain controller's IP address. This is so that the client will be able to translate the domain name that we will be entering later to an IP address. This is known as DNS resolution, and this is why it is important that the DC's IP address is static. Finally, change the domain of the client via the system settings. This method that I have shown you is one way of connecting the client to the domain. This is the GUI method, or Graphical User Interface. Another method will be using the PowerShell, such as this. And all that sums up the key elements for Lab 1. The key elements that I selected for Lab 2 is first, Best Practice Analyzer, or BPA. Secondly, the Domain User Account Management in the Active Directory. And finally, the Managing Organizational Units, which includes delegation. The Best Practices Analyzer, or BPA, is really useful in identifying the potential system issues based on these best practice rule categories. After running a BPA scan, we will be able to get quite a number of issues. It is important to look at the report and analyze the issue for information that can help us resolve the issue. Unfortunately, BPA does not provide automated solutions. The next key element will be Domain User Account Management. This includes creating a domain user account via the Active Directory. Moreover, when creating accounts, we should take note of good practices. For example, a user should be able to change his password upon his first successful login. The reason for this is a security concern. Most administrators will hand over a default password to the users. Hence, it is important that the user change this default password immediately, so that others will not be able to guess the password. The last key element for Lab 2 is Managing Organizational Units, or OU for short. I have created an organizational unit here and have added objects into it. An organizational unit is a grouping of related objects within a domain. It provides us with more flexibility in managing the resources. Another advantage of assigning an OU is delegation. Delegation is advantageous for organizations that need to grant a user certain special privileges, such as creating user accounts or even resetting passwords for other users, but do not want to appoint them as domain administrators. This adds on to the overall security of the Active Directory. This delegation of special permissions was added using the delegation wizard. And that sums up the key elements for Lab 2. We will now be moving on to the final lab, which is Lab 3. The previous labs that we have gone through covered mostly administrative operations. Only the BPA was related to security operations. Elements that I've selected for Lab 3 is firstly, determining effective NTFS permissions, followed by Security Configuration Wizard or SCW, and then Auditing. The first security operation that we will cover, which is also a key element, will be determining the effective NTFS permissions. When setting explicit permissions to an object, it may accumulate with the inherited permissions as well. Hence, it may be unclear for what is the effective permissions of that object. Thankfully, the Effective Access tab allows us to view the effective permissions of an object easily. We may enter a domain local group, global group, or just a user. And we are able to view their effective permissions for this object. The next key element that I will be talking about is the Security Configuration Wizard or SCW. Due to some default security configurations set by the Windows Server, we may not be able to change certain network settings, such as toggling the network discovery feature. This feature is essential when configuring shared folders. Thus, using the SCW will allow us to change the default network security rules. Moreover, the security configurations that we have modified through the SCW can also be exported and applied to other servers. This allows for easy server configuration and setup. This is especially useful for enterprises that are setting up their servers in a large scale. The very last element that I will be sharing with you is auditing. This is another security operation. I have set certain auditing for this object such that if a user tries to access it or delete it, it will alert us via the event logs. After attempting to trigger the audit event, we can view the logs by going to the event viewer. We may enter search options such as event IDs or keywords. The PowerShell can also be used to view event logs using simple CMD-lets. And that summarizes all of the key elements covered for Lab 3. Overall, I have talked about the key elements that I think are really significant in administrative and security operations. The administrative operations, such as connecting a client to the domain and creating users through the Active Directory, is essential when scaling a company. As the company gets bigger and bigger, organizational units will come in handy. They allow us to group related objects together and enforce better security, as well as delegation to certain users for special administrative functions. In terms of security operations, we have covered on the Best Practice Analyzer tool, as well as the Security Configuration Wizard tool. These tools are useful when hardening the system. We have also talked about auditing, which is useful when we are logging events that are happening within our Active Directory. I have come to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching.